venga por mí.
Last night, on the order of the President of the United States,
Aquí no esperan Miraflores.
and in support of a request from the Department of Justice,
No se tarde en llegar.
the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice two indicted persons, Nicolas and Cecilia Maduro.
¡Cobarde!
Happy New War. We're 3 days into 2026 and the United States has swooped into Venezuela and abducted their president, Nicolas Maduro. Some people are calling this a regime change war. I'm on the fence about that. See, Nicolas Maduro is just one guy, and his government and allies are still standing. In this video, I want to contextualize what's happening and try to predict the future. There are 6 important topics. 1. International law. 2. Great power competition. 3. Logistics. 4. Guyana. 5. Future possibilities. And 6. Future certainties. So, question 1. Was this illegal under international law? Well, yeah. It's an unapproved incursion into Venezuela's sovereign territory to abduct its constitutional president. However, the Americans might argue that he rigged the 2020 election and wasn't the rightful president. These are the countries which do recognize his government, and these are the countries which don't recognize his government. There are quite a few of them. The US does not recognize his government, so it makes total sense that they would prosecute him if he was on their soil. The hard part is getting him onto US soil legally. They tried to do this by offering a bounty of $50 million, but it didn't work. $50 million is actually quite a low number for a sitting head of state, in my opinion. Regardless, this meant they had to make a military incursion into Venezuela's territory and abduct him. The military trespass and abduction is illegal under international law by itself. The fact they bombed a bunch of things going in and out makes it much worse. Now, you might think that Venezuela's opposition party won the election and therefore they can give approval to the US to enter their territory. I don't think they can do this for 2 reasons. The first reason is that even their allies don't recognize Maduro's opposition as the legitimate government of Venezuela, as Trump said it would be difficult for her to lead the country when she doesn't have enough support. The second reason is more practical. The UN General Assembly is full of countries that don't want this to happen to them, and they'll probably make a declaration to that effect. The case could go before the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, but the US doesn't recognize their authority when it comes to military matters, so they'll just be ignored. It'll be quite similar to the Israel case. It's also worth mentioning that the abduction of Maduro is exactly 35 years after the US abducted the leader of Panama. In both cases, the US charged them with drug offenses and said they were dictators using fraudulent elections to stay in power. There wasn't an international court case about that, but there might be this time, and at the very least we'll hear about the US's domestic prosecution. I'll probably make a separate video on Maduro's trial when more information is available. The short version is he's being charged with narco-terrorism, which is when drug traffickers try to influence governments through violence or intimidation. And naturally, he's claiming he's a prisoner of war and does not want a speedy trial. Question 2. What does this mean for America's competition with the other great powers? Well, Venezuela was an ally of China, Russia, and Iran. Probably a useful one too, since they were located in the Americas and sitting on a huge supply of oil. It would be wrong to think the US was simply invading an adversarial country, though. The US had important interests in Venezuela in the 20th century, and that only changed when Venezuela went through economic hardship and nationalized the oil industry. The US is trying to pull Venezuela back into its sphere of influence, rather than just trying to keep it out of China's. That said, we won't see any economic change from America's intervention for at least a few years. It takes time for oil and other resources to start moving, especially when it's unclear who controls the territory. For example, American oil companies are not going to be rushing to invest in Venezuela when there's a chance the country falls into chaos or Trump loses the next election and the US completely withdraws. That leads us into the third question quite nicely. What are the logistics of this going to look like? Well, we'll probably see the US establish a military base in Venezuela if they want long-term control of the oil fields. That would also make a withdrawal much more difficult for future administrations. On the political front, there will have to be another election in Venezuela. The US cannot allow the existing regime to run the election because they'll just rig it again. So we're probably going to have a lot of election monitors from other countries go to oversee things. Although, there is still a chance that they just cooperate with the existing regime, which Trump has hinted at. The fourth question concerns Venezuela's neighboring country. What does this mean for Guyana? Don't worry if you've never heard of them. The only reason I have is because last year Venezuela was hinting that it would annex the region of Essequibo from Guyana. They even held a referendum on it, which is not a good way to plan a war. Now, there's a lot of history between these two countries, but it's not really worth going into right now. The The important part is that Guyana will be feeling a lot safer now that Venezuela is distracted by the US. And if Venezuela falls into complete chaos, there might be an opportunity for Guyana to increase its influence and resolve their disputes peacefully. Now for the fun part. Question 5. What are the future possibilities? The first possibility is that the regime doesn't fight back. Even if it doesn't fight back, the government will be reluctant to cooperate with whoever the Americans support, and trust in Venezuela's independence will be shaken. Domestically, this is a recipe for a weak government. The second possibility is that the regime does fight back. Over half of Venezuela's territory is covered by trees, so a guerrilla war with them might look reminiscent of Vietnam. However, I don't think the Venezuelans will try that, and if they did, I think the war would end a lot sooner. Regardless of the fate of Venezuela, there's another big possibility. We might see China and Russia trying to abduct the leaders of other countries in the same manner as the US. It would be a bit funny if world wars were replaced with countries capturing each other's princesses, or presidents in this case. Ultimately, it wouldn't mean anything if these leaders were abducted, though. The governments would simply reorganize and continue, and someone worse would take power. Governments aren't just like 5 people anymore, they are massive institutions. The other big possibility is that the US may intervene in Cuba or Mexico. The Americans have been talking about defeating the cartels and the communists for decades. If the intervention in Venezuela goes extremely well, they might see this as the perfect time to get their house in order and to really re-establish the Monroe Doctrine, which basically states that the Western Hemisphere is the US's sphere of influence, and they don't want any pesky Europeans or China having a foothold in the Americas. The Mexican president has already objected to the seizure. In response, Trump said he offered to defeat the cartels in Mexico, and the president of Mexico refused. The final question is what will happen because of this? What can we be certain of? The other South American countries will grow more concerned about potential intervention. We will likely see crackdowns on drugs and immigration to avoid antagonizing the US. Simultaneously, we'll see a rise in military spending and the formation of defensive alliances. However, aligning more closely with China or Russia might just draw the Americans' wrath. So these might just be alliances with each other and purchasing weapons from overseas. Overall, the Americans might get what they want. One harsh reprisal could seriously curb the drug trade. There will also be immediate defensive actions from Venezuela's neighbors. They'll want to try and contain and monitor what's happening in Venezuela because it could easily spill over into their countries. Supposedly, Colombia is already doing that, despite being on friendly terms with Venezuela. Bonus question for all of you. Do you think Trump will win the FIFA Peace Prize of 2026? The opposition leader for Venezuela won the last Nobel Peace Prize, so who knows? Leave your answer in the comments below.